I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Wednesdays, we focus on economic development, business in our community and actually around the world. We're pleased to do that today. But today is such a special day. It's Inauguration Day, and I think, like you, all of us have been involved in watching the peaceful transfer of power from the outgoing Trump administration to the incoming Biden-Harris team. We're prayerful that things remain peace, and we're prayerful that the new team, the new Congress, and all of us together can put all of our best energy into addressing the major challenges of our communities and our country. Obviously, COVID-19. We hope that we have to praise industry for being able to respond and produce in record time effective vaccines. And we hope that the new administration will build on and deliver the promise of getting those vaccines into the arms of citizens around the country, and that the world will experience the same success in arming itself with prevention and cure around the COVID-19 virus, the pandemic. But we're also dealing with what I call the pandemic of 1619, or for some, it's the pandemic of 1492. And that's the question, the challenge, the consequence of systemic, structural, cultural racism, white supremacist thought that I believe is being challenged. And the challenge in part comes from experiences arising right here in Twin Cities, Minnesota. We're ground zero by virtue of the experience of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. Ground zero in the examination of injustice and the call for justice, not only in Minnesota, but in the country and around the world. All of these represent weighty challenges, but I believe weighty opportunities as well. I think both of these pandemics affect the business and cultural and educational and every element of life in our community. Well, I'm going to be throwing tough questions like that out to my guests today. I'm pleased to welcome a friend and leader in business. First of all, let me welcome Warren Mclean. Warren Mclean is the president of NEON, and NEON stands for North Side Economic Opportunity Network. Is that correct, Leon? NEON, correct, Warren?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So Warren brings over 30 years of experience and an extensive background in finance and strategic planning, fundraising, program development. Prior to joining NEON, he led the Community Reinvestment Fund as the Vice President of Development. He led CRF's efforts to enlist support from philanthropic institutions, corporations, and others seeking to promote community development. And he served on the board of trustees for that organization for 10 years. I met Warren prior to that when he was the CEO of MEDA, Metropolitan Economic Development Association. He was there as president and chief executive officer, 10 years, tripled the organization's budget, and leading the charge to provide strategic direction and execution of programs that resulted in groundbreaking growth. He also established more infrastructure ways to create loan programs to assist minority-owned businesses and support job creation within our community. Warren, thank you for being here. There's more in your resume that I can read, but I'll let you tell your story. Thank you, and it's good to see you again, my friend. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to bring Jeff Washburn and other guests in a minute as well. Let me acknowledge my colleague and co-host here, Carmen Robles, who is managing this project as the executive producer of Conversations with Al McFarlane. But Warren, with you, thank you for being here. Give people an idea of the value proposition of NEON.
Well, our mission is to build wealth for low to moderate income entrepreneurs in North Minneapolis and the surrounding community. And our vision is to transform North Minneapolis into a prosperous, sustainable, highly visible, and diverse community of multicultural entrepreneurs. So we want to do that. We're excited about that mission and that vision, and we think that the things that are happening now in North Minneapolis are catalytic. And so we are excited about the prospects for the future. And so I'm just excited to have that opportunity to share our work and to visit with you, Al, and you, Carmen, both old friends. And it's great.
Well, so what's happening in North Minneapolis? Let me say, for those who don't know, that North Minneapolis is the largest Black population and considered kind of the hub of the Black community in Minnesota. It's been the center of public policy for Black community, in part because Insight is situated in North Minneapolis, and we've been doing public policy work starting way back with the programs we did at Lucille's Kitchen a dozen years ago. But this is where energy resides for moving the ball forward on public policy, public engagement. And right now, West Broadway and North Minneapolis are at the center of attention for development. What's the lay of the land right now as you see it, Warren McLean?
Well, right now, first of all, there's a 927 building that both Jan Rose Phillips Family Foundation and Tri Construction and the New Rules and maybe other folks are, but those at least those two or three organizations, they're remodeling that building, and it's major because it's the first time that a foundation is actually locating in the heart of the community, and so they're really putting their mouth and their money where their vision is, and so we really appreciate that. That we think that's very catalytic. They've already had a groundbreaking. In addition to that, Tim Baylor is launching Satori Village right on West Broadway. That's a $60 million project. That's coming to fruition. The Capri Theater up on the western part and more northern part of West Broadway is also being completed, and that probably be done in maybe early February or March. They'll have their grand opening. So we have all those events that are occurring right now, and we think that we're excited about that. We think all these activities are catalytic to what's going on, and then I'm part of a coalition called the Destination Northside Coalition, where a number of us meet every week, where we talk about structuring and sort of collectively and collaborating on the future of not only West Broadway, but North Minneapolis. And so we're excited about that. That's building momentum. Right now, we're talking about actually doing a cleanup on certain projects that were burned down. And so we're talking about putting resources into that. And we see that at the beginning of not only a restoring of that, but causing those opportunities to once again flourish. So we're really excited about all that momentum that's going on in North Minneapolis.
Jeff Washburn heads the Community Land Trust. You can give me the full and proper title, Jeff. Good to see you again, my friend. But the Community Land Trust is a novel strategy for getting people into home ownership. It addresses the question of wealth. And would you address the question of wealth and related to the mission that Warren has described about economic development? Because you have to have money, and people have to have money to grow a community. And these things are going to be out if they support each other. What is the land trust vision and value proposition? How does that relate to the overall development, the economy of the Black community of North Minneapolis?
Sure. Thanks again for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. We've been plugging away at this for close to 20 years, and I think that value proposition has I wouldn't say necessarily changed over time, but what we've been able to talk about over time has changed. When we started back in the early 2000s, I think we were really only allowed to really be talking about affordable housing and long-term affordable housing. But I think that conversation has really changed as the times have changed. And we're talking a lot more about community ownership with, as you're aware, the spinoff of a commercial land trust to create greater community ownership, as well as our ability to grow the community land trust to really focus on creating the opportunity for households to do better for themselves. I think we've known all along that there's hundreds, if not thousands of people here in Minneapolis that want to do better for themselves and their families. And what the Community Land Trust does is provide a sizable lift to help somebody get into home ownership. I think one of the classic examples that's playing out right now is Wells Fargo they have a lift program right now where eligible low-income, moderate-income households can take advantage of up to $15,000 in down payment assistance. If a household can't get into a position to get a pre-approval with a mortgage lender, get into a purchase agreement, they will never, ever be able to access that down payment assistance. And I think times like these especially demonstrate that we're able to, and excuse the bad analogy, help folks get onto the field, because if they're not on the field, they're never going to score that touchdown. And so it's an access point not only into home ownership, but also for vehicles to take advantage of these down payment and forgivable loans that a lot of other households have been able to take advantage of. Households satisfy that term, and that's $15,000. That's 100% their equity. And yes, the Community Land Trust, if there is a change in value, we share in that increase or decrease in value with the homeowner. And the reason we do that is so we can keep that home permanently affordable. But it's so important that it also creates a cash flow, in many cases, opportunity for households on a monthly basis. On average, households are saving anywhere from $200 to $300 a month. What they're previously paying in rent to what they're paying in home ownership.
Carmen, question, comment, Carmen?
Hi, no, I'm excited to hear that, because home ownership, or just home, is the foundation for everything. And once a person has a home, or the ability to purchase a home, in my community, we think that purchasing is not a good investment, that it's easier to rent. And so we're not privy to the value of home ownership and what it brings. So I appreciate your agency, because right now we need it more than ever. So this is good to hear, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, let's bring a different voice in. Pleased to have Anthony Riddle joining us via technology from Brooklyn, New York. Anthony Riddle is the Senior Vice President for Community Media at BRIC, B-R-I-C. It's a leading arts and media institution anchored in downtown Brooklyn, New York. And for over 40 years, BRIC has shaped Brooklyn's cultural and media landscape by presenting and incubating artists, creators, students, and media makers. And as a creative catalyst for the community, BRIC ignites learning in people of all ages and tries to center diverse voices that can take risk and drive culture forward in building the community's creative future. And so, Anthony, thank you for being here, first of all. Congratulations on all of your success and your work and your life work. The question I've often raised, and I want you to dwell on, is this notion of culture. I have observed as a media person here in Minnesota, this is years ago when I started my own newspaper and beyond, that the market in general was willing to and continue to marginalize Black people, people of color. Our lives didn't matter. Our stories didn't matter. And in fact, our culture was viewed as a liability. White people would say, even though you're Black, you're okay, right? Or you might be Black, I know it's not your folks. Or you might be Black, and I can put up with that. Let me give you one story here. I went to school in southwest Minnesota, and I was sitting in a commons area, and I walked into a group of kids at a table, and they were having this heated, animated argument about, race and ethnicity, et cetera. And so the white kids, I thought was my friend, I walked in the middle of his statement. He said, take Al here. Al could marry my sister. Al and I could share the same fork. I said, well, isn't he great, right? And then he said, but those dirty, lying, thieving, and a litany of other words that I'm used to having as describing Black people, but he said all those things about Indians. And so the Indians, the native people, were on his mind because his family and community and culture were closest to the suppression and the annihilation with which they had visited native, Aboriginal people. That same spirit would reflect how whites might have interacted with my mom's family in Mississippi or my dad's family in Jamaica. So the question is culture. And so they wanted us to apologize for being who we are, with the idea that we will be better if we could simply wash our skin, wash our minds, and become white people. I'm going to leave that there and have you react to it, respond to it, because I think you are a cultural warrior and an advocate defending the genius of our people.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for that, and I want to say hello. I don't know if you remember meeting me many years ago. I used to run Minneapolis telecommunications a long time ago in the early '90s. I had come to Atlanta I'd come to Minneapolis from Atlanta, which was pretty much night and day, no pun intended. My father is an artist, or was an artist, in the Black Arts movement, started in the '60s and so forth out on the West Coast. And one of the things that he taught me was that that there was no art, or culture that didn't have a political meaning. So that if you just splashed the color red on a painting and called that a painting, then probably that was a reflection of where you stood in society and how important you thought your culture needed to be in the preservation of your life. And so I was raised in that. And so when I run a public access center, it's not, presumably it's about free speech. And free speech is essentially the article of faith that allows it to take place. But the real thing that's taking place is the acceptance of people at their face value in the way that they want to present themselves. And the understanding that the way that people present themselves has something to do with the culture that allowed them to survive. And so when you look at the cultures that that Black people in America have, the various cultures, they reflect our environment and our reaction to the environment in the same way that that some white people's cultures may reflect the environment that they're in. That's not to say that these cultures are monolithic or whatever, but I've traditionally, first of all, looked at it as us all being here on this miraculous planet Earth, and not knowing what Earth is or why we're here, and that the basic product of your life is for you to find that out, for you to understand who you are and why you are, and why the people around you are the way that they are, and what it all means. And I just don't think that I can figure this all out by myself on the basis of my own life. I think that for me to be able to understand the nature of this world that we live in, I need to be able to have access to all the other things that other people are learning about their own position. And so when you hear the comment yesterday of the outgoing Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, stating that America is not a multicultural state, that's not who we are. I actually feel sorry for him, because he's looking at himself as being within the sole arbiter of what human life is, and not being able to draw on the experiences of others. And so when people ask you to be white or to merely reflect the culture that they have, then it's not only a loss to you of the ability to be who you are, but it's a loss to them, because then they don't really get to understand the value of what you've seen and what you've learned. And so my job has always been to preserve a place where people can present themselves as they are for other people, or that they can come and they can interact with the lives and cultures of other people. So, it's not a matter of one culture being better, one culture not being better. It's a matter of us learning how to deal with our differences in a way that's productive and adds to our understanding of what's going on. Because, frankly, we got a lot of stuff to figure out.
Warren, jump in here and give your input on what the impact on business and economic development will be, what it was in the past 4 years under the Trumpian philosophy. Trump could have claimed a lot of things, changes in tax policy, and other things that benefited some businesses and entrepreneurs, and what you are looking for, what you think you can expect as a business developer in the incoming administration. What do you want? What did you want under the Trump administration? Did you get it? And what do you want under the incoming administration? And how do you ensure that you put all of your energy into getting what you need for your mission, your vision?
Well, with respect to the past administration, I'm not sure that we had a lot of input on that. I mean, what we do have now is an opportunity going forward with this administration that I think is charged with embracing the new, I would say, diverse climate, the need and to recognize, and as President Biden said today, he acknowledged publicly systemic racism as an issue. Mm-hmm. And so him just publicly stating that says to me that he understands the challenge there. We also have the first woman vice president of color in that position, a Black woman. So I think he has the opportunity for this administration to really put resources in our community in a way that hasn't been before. I know things stopped under the Trump administration. I was speaking to someone yesterday, and there was a program that existed under the prior administration that when the Trump administration came in, that program was abandoned. There's now an opportunity to re-engage with that program. But more than that, we want to not just repeat the past, but we want to increase the resources of the future. I think we want to make sure that we are pouring resources in a way that's sustainable, in a way that is significant, and a way that's focused. So I think we're trying to advance the Black and Latino communities. I think we need focused investment there, not a diluted investment. Not like there's an emphasis today on BIPOC businesses. We need to understand that means BIPOC. Not sort of this broader diluted statement about inclusion. And I'm not against that, but I'm just saying that if you want the Black community to advance, you got to put money in the Black community. If you want the Latino community to advance, you got to put money in that community. Mm-hmm. You can't dilute the effort and say, well, it's not a rising tide, that lifts all boats. It's targeted initiatives that cause things to happen. And so I think there's a targeted investment, a huge infusion, and a sustainable infusion of capital that's needed. Not only capital, but resources and doors that are opened that have been closed for so many years. And we not only need capital, but we need opportunities for business. We need opportunities where our clients and Black-owned businesses, Latino businesses can actually get business. They can bid on contracts. We're not asking for a handout. We're asking for opportunity to unleash the creativity that our communities have. We've got a lot of creativity in North Minneapolis, and not only in North Minneapolis, other communities like ours. There's a lot of creativity there that needs to be unleashed, and right now, to me, it's bottled up. And so we have an opportunity to unleash that community. Unleash that opportunity, those creativity, and purpose it in a way that will lift our community in a sustainable, long-term way. That's what I think we have the opportunity to do. I think this administration has an inflection point, and they need to change the direction of this country in a significant way. They need to plant a flag that says this community will indeed advance the communities that have been underrepresented, under-resourced for so many years, that they'll do it in a substantial way.
One of the ways that may happen, Warren, and from what I've read and heard in speeches, is the new administration's commitment to energy policy, and to shifting to clean energy, to solar energy. And what I have been reading is that one of the intents one of the strategies is to make investments for improving and creating sustainable energy, to cite those investments in the middle of America's Black community. Have you heard that? And does that make sense as a strategy, a policy strategy, an economic strategy that can have significant long-term sustainable benefit for businesses and consumers and for the nation? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a good strategy. I've not heard that, that they were going to do that, but I'm excited about it. I don't know if you're familiar with Van Jones, but Van Jones had come forward with a platform for green jobs in Oakland several years ago. And so I think we can take a picture of what he's done in the past and elevate it, because that was his whole premise, that we can really launch green jobs. We can really launch, green businesses in a substantial way. So I think there is a playbook, I guess is what I'm saying. And so if we go back to that playbook, make sure that BIPOC businesses like in the midst of that playbook, we can really use that green strategy in a way to lift our communities and make them not only create jobs with it, but make the communities healthier. Because that will help us become a healthy community.
Anthony, how important is it to shift the narrative in our community? I told you one narrative of how the relationship we're keeping our community at a disadvantage, marginalized, because that was the understanding of the institution of the majority, and whether it was intentional or mean-spirited or not, it had a negative, deleterious effect on my business in particular, and our people in general. And it's about the narrative, the understanding, the awareness, the vocabulary. How important is it as a communicator that we grab a hold of the tools of definition, that we define roles, responsibilities, accountabilities differently, in ways that empower our people to become our best selves without disadvantaging anybody else? What do you think? And talk, if you would, about this whole thing I raised with Warren and Jeff, the intersection between wealth creation for the individuals and wealth creation through enterprise and serving individuals, and that's what business, in my view, represents. Anthony, what do you think?
Well, I think the narrative is actually everything. I mean, because what you're told and how you view yourself, first of all, is it delimits the opportunities that you think are available to you. But if you're talking about a business, it also limits or promotes the audience that you're going to have for the services that you have. So, for instance, in a world in which there are no Black scientists ever seen, then there's a sense that Black people are not able to conduct themselves in technological manner that's going to help anybody. But lately, as you've seen, even if you look at the current vice president of the United States, the effect that that's had on my daughters and their outlook, and going forward, you can't really underestimate that. But also, I think it's important that all of the businesses that you're talking about recognize the age that we're in with regard to telecommunications and technology. That there's hardly a business now that can exist without some sort of social media footprint and representation. And so, in addition to being able to build a house, the architectural firm is going to have somebody on staff who's handling their online presence and making their services known to people. So, you can't really overestimate the value of communications technology at this point.
So, Jeff, how important is the question of narrative, the question of creating expectations for individuals around the question of home ownership, of equity, and of personal wealth building? What's the story of wealth building for America, and how has that story eluded people of color in general, Black people in particular? And what change in that narrative must occur right now, and how will the change occur in ways that deliver truth and power and opportunity to people that have been left out, kept out. What do you think, Jeff Washburn?
Big question. I mean, it's gone back. I mean, easily. You hear referenced VA loans coming out of World War II as one of the key places. But just recently, we were looking at data here in the state of Minnesota, and the home ownership disparity between BIPOC households and white households, the disparity was better, meaning it was less back in 1980 than it is today here in the state of Minnesota. And so, yeah, I was kind of blown away, and it's really kind of hovered in the same space. And I'm pretty certain that the same figures exist here for the city of Minneapolis. And so if we do believe, and I think one of the narratives we try to change is that, first and foremost, I know we talked about wealth creation, is that we talk about housing and homes, more importantly, as stability for the households we're serving, and looking not only at the asset as the market adds value or takes value away from that asset over time, to talking about how our lives being changed. So every 2 years we go and we go back and to the households we've been able to serve, and we ask them, what's changed in your life? Are you better? Are your kids better off? Did you get another job? Have you gone back to school as an adult? Are your kids doing better in school?
Back to earth. We're back to earth.
There we are. Yeah. Are your kids doing better in school? Is your health better? Asking these types of questions and trying to figure out ways. Are there additional ways that we can quantify this wealth building? I'm still trying to get at how we actually. I think we can pin down, because we're required to collect so much data from households when they apply with our organization. But how do we start to gauge 5, 10, 15 years later, when we ask a survey like this, can we get our arms around their net assets? Where are they sitting? I mean, yes, we know we can figure out how much they've paid down on their mortgage, but where else in life have they been able to kind of start to build those assets back up? I'm a firm, long time I've been talking with all of our electeds here in the city and policymakers statewide to say, I don't know if the answer is exactly in the land trust. The land trust, I think, solves for a number of different dilemmas that the market's put upon us. But can we talk about this concept of long-term reparations with shared equity and put some serious money on the table? That part of it is forgiven over X period of time. And that's straight out cash that a homeowner can benefit from, much more than the $15,000. No discredit to Wells Fargo, but much bigger than that $15,000 we were talking about earlier. And then another portion of those funds would be tied to the long-term affordability that starts to decommoditize this real estate that is running out of control. And it's not just in Minneapolis, it's all over the country. And that divide, and my fear coming out of COVID is that, we know this, the rich are going to get way richer because they had assets to play with during this tough time. And the poor people, which, again, speaking to folks that already know this, are disproportionately households of color, are going to be way worse off. And the only way we're going to start to get at this is by making meaningful investments. I mean, I think we shared on the last time I was on your show, back of envelope calculation, I think $920 million would solve for the home ownership disparity in the city of Minneapolis specific between white households and black households. Now, it doesn't speak to Latinos, it doesn't speak to Native Americans, but it does. I mean, we can start putting money behind what it's going to take to do this, and we put a lot more resources into building stadiums and other things. So I think let's talk about it, and if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's stop talking about it.
What would you do with $920 million to address the home ownership disparity between blacks and whites in Minneapolis?
It's coming from a biased hat here, but I'm wearing my land trust hat here, and I would structure it similarly to what I just suggested. A big chunk on the table that would be forgiven over X period of time. It's not as important to me, that period of time, but something that gets folks to the table to say, hey, I would be remiss in not taking advantage of this $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 windfall if I satisfy these terms. It's going to focus me on working on my credit issues. It's going to focus me on setting aside a little bit of money on the side. I don't think we're going to change those market functions overnight. So we're going to have to play, I think at least, play within the guardrails that we're given. And how do we incent folks to get better credit scores and set money aside? And be in a position where they can go out and get a mortgage. And then another chunk of money tied to, at least a portion of these dollars would be tied to long-term affordability, so that we could make sure that our kids have an opportunity to get into home ownership. Because I can tell you, as a developer, stuff ain't getting cheaper, and we're not paying people any less, and we shouldn't. Materials aren't getting any cheaper, and there's limited quantities of materials out there. It's only going to get more expensive.
Warren, what kind of money is needed to end the economic disparity in the area of business development for North Minneapolis? And I raise the question because everybody's focused on the Biden-Harris administration's intent, it says, to deliver $1.9 trillion to the fight against COVID-19 and against the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis. What does North Minneapolis need? Is there a number? Jeff's got $920 million for housing. What's the number for business development?
I think last year, I think when Governor Walz and his team was here after the George Floyd murder and the pandemic, I told him we needed $1 billion. So we need. I think we need something like $1 billion. I mean, the projects, as Jeff said, they're not getting any cheaper. I mean, look at just to remodel the $927 billion. A building costs about $6 or $7 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of subsidy, and that's one building.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take long to figure out if you got 60, 70, 80 buildings. You're adding up. That's a lot of money in a very short period of time. And I'm only talking about West Broadway. When you talk about all of North Minneapolis, it's going to take a huge investment in North Minneapolis to repair the buildings, to put up new buildings. We got a lot of buildings here that are vacant. That we need to tear down or at least remodel. We got vacant spaces. So all that is going to take a lot of resource, and a lot of that resource is going to require a lot of subsidy because it's, the market isn't there yet. The market will be there, but the market isn't there yet. And so right now, I just say that it will take probably at least about $1 billion to get that done and to turn around our community. So, and we're excited about it. And, right now we've got $125 million in projects that are already almost shovel ready. So, we need to add another $875 million to that, and we'll get to $1 billion.
Mm-hmm. And so how do we get there? I think at number one, I think to talk about it, I think people have to have the idea in their minds. This is where the narrative comes in, I believe,
right.
As a communicator. People have to conceptualize and to hear and see and feel and taste this idea of what $1 billion is and what it can do, and also take the idea of $1 billion out of the realm of fantasy and imagination and bring it into the world of just numbers, just money, available, doable. How do I get it and how do I do it? And I think this kind of conversation moves us in that direction where we demystify the role, the power, and the availability of money as one of the tools for personal and family and community development.
Mm-hmm.
So what are our strategies that, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can jump in for just a second. And in some ways I feel sort of less than the two gentlemen that are here because I think what I do is really valuable, but they're dealing with really material stuff, and in the end, that's a very important thing. And so when you start talking about narrative, let's talk about, Jeff was just saying, you take all this data, on how people's lives have been changed by home ownership and stuff. This is a story, on the one hand, it's data. On the other hand, it's actually the story of individual lives that are being changed, right? And so when I look at the narrative, if I can just be personal for a second, the narrative in our collective people of color communities right now does not really point to that as a means of improving the family net worth. When I talk to my kids, it's hard to keep them from thinking about being a football player, from being a rapper, from being, somebody who comes up with an idea and hits it big and gets millions and millions of dollars, when really the wealth that most families have is produced one paycheck at a time by having the proper kind of investment, the proper kind of asset built over the series of generations. And so going back to the narrative thing of just being somebody wanting to help this other process that I think is more important, we need to be able to to figure out how to get these stories of how this takes place out in front of people in a way that excites their imagination about something that's not particularly glamorous, but which is a steady way of increasing community wealth.
I think that's a great point. I would say that one of the things that we're doing at Neon is promoting small business owners as champions. About a year or so ago, year and a half ago, we had a first recognition event, and we recognized what we call small business champions. Among them was Sammy's Eatery and Tri Construction and Anissa. I'm blanking on Anissa's last name, but we recognized them. We even recognized a young man who was a Young Entrepreneur of the Year, Jaquan, who had sold hot dogs, and he got a lot of publicity as a result of doing that. But the point was to elevate them and to say, these are sort of heroes that we want people to aspire to being like, and what we want them to replicate their success, because they're not the athletes, they're not the rappers, but they're the everyday business people. That if we raise them up and if we change the narrative about them and elevate them, then the community starts to look at them and say, yeah, they are our champions. They are doing the sort of the basic blocking and tackling, but they're changing our community. And so then we can sort of, instead of not only adding to maybe the different paths that you can have, you can say you can also be a businessman. I mean, Tim Baylor used to be an NFL player, but now he owns 8 McDonald's, and now he's building Satori Village. I mean, so that path that not only gave him the opportunity from the NFL, but now he's changed that into a business, and he's become an important businessman in North Minneapolis. And I think we have an opportunity to elevate folks that are successful in business, regardless of where their start is. That as long as they're making progress, they're sustainable, and that they're obviously hopefully profitable as well, and building wealth for the community, that we can elevate them, because they're also creating jobs. They're putting wealth in the community. They're putting jobs in the community because they typically hire BIPOC employees. So they're dealing with all the elements that we need to build a successful, sustainable community and a prosperous community.
Let me bring another voice into the conversation. I'm pleased to see a person that I've admired and known from a distance for a long time. Haven't seen you in a long time, Juanita Espinosa, and she's the former executive director of the Native Arts Circle. She managed and curated a gallery. She fundraised for artist services. She designed and developed community cultural events and fundraised to re-grant funds to Native artists. She's assisted in developing and providing services to artists locally and internationally. She was a community programming specialist for Northern Range Satellite Center, and she assisted Native chart researchers with community outreach. She's got decades of experience as a community organizer working with health centers and tribes in Minnesota. She's worked with Dr. Tiffany Beckman at University of Minnesota on the study of obesity that was entitled Neural Correlates of Food Reward in American Indian Women. She's also worked to educate the public about Native art and to build a support system for Native artists in Minnesota. She served on boards of numerous community and arts-related organizations. Juanita, good to see you again. Hello, and thank you for joining the conversation. And I'm not hearing you, so I don't know if your microphone is properly. I think you have to log in or click into the program. There you go. Now we got you. Thank you.
Oh. Techno nightmare. And then you notice I had to put those readers on in order to see what I was doing.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So we're talking about how we empower our people, and you might not have heard much of the previous conversation, but jump in just where you are, and I'll throw a proposition out to you that maybe relates with your art and community organizing and health experiences. What are you expecting, given that today is Inauguration Day, in terms of benefit, forward movement for Native communities in the area of health, in the area of education, in the area of acknowledging, validating, supporting, and appreciating culture, our stories, and in the area of where we need to move as human beings to be our best selves. So speak about what today means to you, if anything, with the inauguration, and maybe compare what your expectations are going forward to what the experience might have been under the past Washington, D.C. administration with Donald Trump.
Well, now that one would hope. One would hope you had something to say. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My screen just changed into something else. So, Deborah Holler, the new head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Interior Department, I should say, the Department of War. She is, they kicked off a whole series of activities for this inauguration. And one of the first activities they did was a land acknowledgement. And so what you're going to see across the country is more opportunities for Native people and people of color to come to the forefront in telling their own stories. And I think that the platform is a little more open for that now, which is stuff that certainly people do not want to hear, but we have to remember we're a thinking human public here. We're not just, we don't just follow in line. We have to think about what we're doing. We have to think about where we're going. And if we are any example of what we've done to teach some of that is the young poet laureate. I mean, totally embrace the story of where we're going, and what we can hope to see, because her accountability and her poem or her story there in telling it, I mean, it just kind of opened up all the pores of like, yes, let's make this happen. And if she is example of that next step, then this is where we need to go. I think a lot of people want to believe that there is an opportunity here to come together in a good way, and I think we always have that, but I don't put too much expectation on government. I don't think, we've got a long history in our communities of working with them. We can't expect them, but in terms of our ability to hold them more accountable, I think we have a better footing for that today than we did 4 years ago. And certainly that would be my hope, that there are ways to get in the door and be heard. Whereas in our community, I think a lot of our young people are also making it real clear that they're not going to be waiting for us to open that door for them anymore. They're going to just walk right in and let us know that they have something to say, and hopefully with respect and with with an eye towards not so much compromise, but with an eye towards negotiating and understanding that we have a long way to go here. And what's really important is the land that we see around us. And by doing land acknowledgements, it starts to sort of change the dynamics of how you look at how we care for this land. I think a lot of people think that if you put a fence around it, you spray it, and pour your water on it, you're going to have a nice green yard and the picket fence, and no one can bother you. But the reality is that that's going to kill your children, because those chemicals on that, having that nice green yard, are not good for your kids. And you're going to your retirement's going to look like you're dealing with cancer, or you're dealing with other issues that you can't eat. And those are things that I think are going to be more visible. The stuff I'm doing at the university now is currently working on diabetes and heart disease, and doing research in that realm, and finding that people don't recognize that connection is from what you eat. Really starts from birth, and how you're fed a certain diet has really changed now, because the young people are helping us to open our eyes and look at some of the foods and things that we eat. So with that, you have more of a recognition of that connection to that land, and what's grown there, and how it's grown, and what that water looks like, and how important it is for it to sustain us all beyond today and tomorrow. And so I think the recognition that diabetes can lead to Alzheimer's and heart disease and all those things along that path, means that we have a lot of work to ensure that people are making that connection, and that our support systems, the healthcare and housing, and those things that cause stress if you don't have a home, are lining up to be honest with themselves, and be reading the writing on the wall that we have to change our diets. We have to care more for the people and what we're eating. We have to make more efforts to allow for greenway and roadways, and support of the environment, and recognizing that the land, the whole land acknowledgement piece, allows for a door to Native communities to be at the table, to be invited with their recognition of what they know can help to sustain that land.
I raised the question earlier with the guest, particularly with Brother Anthony, about culture, and how do we ensure that culture is perceived as and is engaged as an asset, not as a liability. And the background for the question was that, as often as not, our cultural sensibilities are disregarded, and our cultural reality is responded to with continued marginalization by colonial or empire or imperial, interest. And I had talked earlier, I think, about how are we going to come through the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. But in earlier programs, I've also talked about the pandemic of 1619, or for some, the pandemic of 1492. And all of it has to do with a reckoning that must occur. And I want your thoughts about the question of culture and the question of reconciliation, or the question of reckoning. How do we reckon with that which has been built on deprivation, conquest, and destruction, the refusal to see us as human beings for advantages that destroyed us, and at the end of the day, destroyed the perpetrators as well, destroyed what they could be. What are your thoughts?
Oh, if only I had the time. I'm sure Tony had much more wisdom than I'm going to share. And certainly by example, you see him riding across the country and putting his ear to the ground. So he's talking to folks out there. Whereas with this whole COVID, I've been sort of maintaining this connection to the internet. And I'm really, really impressed with what we've done with the internet and culture. I spent this weekend attending a virtual culture camp out in South Dakota, which was pretty incredible to me. But a lot of the work I do throughout the year is working with Orville Lookinghorst and his wife Paula on things like All Faiths, All Nations, One Prayer. And with that in mind, we've been able to cross borders of all cultures. And so I think the closer we get the human family to recognize that they have a cultural legacy that's important to their bloodline and to their children, so that they can equally sit at the table without, putting on a headdress and becoming native, so to speak, that they will find a place for culture to be at the table, regardless of whose it is. And I think that often we are so removed from it, and we're not encouraged to find that connection that already is in all our veins. That we all come from a place from before, and our histories and our families, our relatives, they all lent something to us to be where we are today. And that didn't come by magic. That was perseverance. So I'm sure, because that's who we come from, that's where we're going to end up. We're going to just keep persevering with that message, regardless of whether or not everybody acknowledges it, I guess. And for me, in a lot of our communities, we went underground with a lot of our stuff in order to survive. And so, because it exists and survived, and we're still praying, all faiths, all nations, one prayer, that that we are still children of Mother Earth. We are still children that are caretakers and have learned to caretake this land, and we are still recognizing the value of what she is as a mother and not as a resource. And so the more we come to terms with recognizing that we all have a place on her to care for her. Otherwise, why would we be here? You know, we're here now for a reason. And I think that's been one of my most difficult things is in dealing with culture. There's sort of a perception that it's about, you know, art on the wall, and yet, you know, it can go. It's everything. It's what you eat. It's what you wear. It's how you speak, and all of those things need encouragement and a place at the table. And those individuals in the communities that want to learn that stuff need to have support and inroads and encouragement. That to me is a given. You know, from the beginning of my doing community organizing work, I've always said I wanted to see my people dress, and I think that people often mistaken what that means. Like, you know, like we're kind of walking around with no clothes on or something, you know, with our breech cloths and moccasins. But it was really that feeling of, you know, when you wake up in the morning and you dress yourself and you get ready and you can, you know, whether it's we put a comb through your hair, or you put water on your face, but you build yourself every day to go out into the world, to be seen by other people, to live your purposeful life. And so that purposefulness is what we need to figure out how to instill in everybody, that we all have a purpose here, whatever that might be, whether, you know, and we don't know what it is, so we have to encourage people to find it, you know, and give them options to look for it, and not, you know, not just give up, you know.
Mhm.
You and Anthony, I think, probably, I know you did know Laura Waterman Woodstock,
Oh, very well, yes.
and we lost her this week. I don't know if you knew her, Jeff,
Yeah.
but talk about her for a minute. She was a force in the
Oh,
community.
she was stubborn. She was solid. You know, I mean, if you really wanted to know something, she told you exactly what happened, when, and how. And I think for me, when I came to town, one of my big deals was I went around and I visited with all the elders in the community. I was like 20 years old, you know, and so it gave me that opportunity um, for them to. They were sort of like, I don't know if they wanted to tell me or they didn't want to tell me, but some people had never been asked. And so I didn't want to disrupt what had already been done, and I didn't want to take it down a path that, you know, I didn't want to end up down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So I made a point of visiting with everyone, and she was one of them. And so with that, I can't say I developed you know, I mean, I certainly believe we were always friends,
Hmm.
but I would say I wanted her to mentor me, but she was tough. She was really strong, and you know, I worked with all the movement people, and so she was always there as a support. But um, I just know of her as being very, very tough. Like, you know, if you were going to put something out there, you put that period in the right place. And I was never that good at putting that period in the right place. I could just go on and talking and let's do this and let's do that, sort of hone you into like let's get what we can done today, not
Yep, yep.
trying to dream beyond what you can do. So no, I loved her dearly though. She actually encouraged me to quit smoking. She quit smoking when she was 6 years old, and she told me how that was one of the things, you know, in media. I mean, what do? We spend our time sitting around visiting with people. So you start smoking cigarettes, which I shouldn't say that's the way it happens, but you know, you kind of grow up drinking coffee and you know, smoking cigarettes, talking to folks. And so we sort of talked about that whole environment that we came up in, from writing proposals together and things that was one of the things that was the hardest to get rid of, because it was a way we socialized. And when we quit doing it, we had to find other ways to socialize. So her and I would always laugh when we get together about the funny places that we get to meet to socialize. So, you know, I really I adore her for the children she brought into the world. I mean, they are all incredible human beings. So that's been a gift that she shared with us beyond, beyond her work in the community. So I'm really thankful that they're doing a fund in honor of her, and I'm really thankful that she was able to do the things she did. McGeezy continues to be that force working with young people, and she's mentored almost everyone in the community, in the funding world, to look at how to put together your perspectives. And so I think all of that is really, I mean, that's a wealth. I haven't done that, but she has really watered the next generation, so to speak, so they all can, stand up and speak out for what's important. And I continue to be that person that's like, hey, wait a minute, let's try this.
Mhm.
But I have other people that she's trained now that I can go to, so they'll put it on paper and make it make more sense. I've always been a little loose cannon at times on what I like to do and what I don't like to do, and I've gotten so I do less these days if I can. But with this whole COVID thing, reacquainting myself with Carmen. Carmen has been a lifelong friend of mine anyway. She's one of my sisters and family, but to start making masks and doing things for our community that aren't being done, and we're not looking for fanfare or anything about it. We're just looking to do something to contribute and to help in a way that we can contribute and not feel like we have to be out there. Because right now there's so many things on the streets that people are trying to do with dealing with the homeless and
Mhm.
and the drug abuse and use, and continuing to figure out how to help our kids. So our making masks is sort of one way for us to contribute to keeping them safe. So
Wonderful. Warren, let me jump to you, and I'm going to close out with this. This conversation sort of expands. It's not the traditional narrow focused way to look at wealth building or building community, but it infuses this conversation with the question of identity. And identity is in part at the core because we're looking at North Minneapolis and what it takes to quote unquote revitalize and to grow the community into sustainability and viability and economic wealth and well-being for the residents of the community. And so, I want you to sort of close this conversation, if you would, Warren, on what the NEON perspective is. How do you engage the questions of culture that we talked with Juanita and Anthony about, and the question of housing, how housing goes hand in hand with development of vitality in community, and how all of that amounts to way of life. I think that's what Juanita is talking about, way of life that is ours, that represents us, that reflects our dignity and our opportunity, and a future in which we win. And winning may not be winning as people conceive it. We may be talking about a winning that doesn't require anyone else to lose. Winning differently. What do you think, Warren Mclean?
Boy, wow.
yay!
Let me just say that, first of all, identity is critical. Sort of knowing who you are everything sort of emanates from that. If you have a positive and constructive concept of yourself, then you can be victorious in how you live and how you approach things. And so one of the things that we do at NEON is we don't exclude people. One of the things that we do is we encourage all ideas because people have always encountered negativity. They've been told they can't do something, they can't do that, or they can't do this, and so we say you have to opt out of NEON, which means that you have to self-select out, because we will encourage you in whatever opportunity, whatever you think you can make happen. Obviously, we'll try to steer it so that if we see you kind of going off the guardrails, we'll give you guidance there. But we encourage the fact that you are a champion. I mean, business owners are taking risk, and that risk is important. Everybody doesn't take that risk, and so they're risking their livelihood. They're risking all kinds of their savings, all kinds of things to make business happen. And so they have to have a positive perspective and outlook that believes that they can make things happen. And we've got some extraordinary examples. I know one woman who came to, well, just even before Neon, but all she could do was clean. And she was a person who had been incarcerated for a while, but she overcame that. And now she's put her daughter through college, and she's got her own home, and her business is quite successful. So, I mean, we've got a number of examples like that. And so, but it's because she knew that she could get things done, that she could accomplish things. But, that begins with her identity. And to speak it out and to become part of the narrative helps change the narrative. That when she can say, hey, I can do it, and other people look at her and say, well, she did it, I can do it as well. Mm-hmm. And those people are creative. And so I think that if we unleash the creativity that we have in our community, and speak it forth and say that we are capable, we have the ability, we have the capacity, we have the intelligence, we have all those things that are required. All we need is the capital and for people to remove the constraints that have always held us back. I think that's an opportunity that we have, and I believe that we can positively change the narrative in not only North Minneapolis, but this country. And so we've got examples of that. We got sparks of around the country, but we now need to make it not an outlier, but a mainstream concept of how we go forward. And I think we have that opportunity right now with this administration as we come, as things have been launched today.
Warren, you rose to the challenge. Good job. Thank you. Well said. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody here, starting with my colleague and partner, Carmen Robles. Carmen, thank you for organizing this and many great conversations that we're having every day. And
thank you, Anthony.
Thank you to Anthony Riddle for joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Thank you
for having me.
Washburn with the Community Land Trust Movement, and to Juanita Cordine Espinosa. Juanita, good to see you again. And thank you for your words of wisdom, for your service and your leadership. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Tomorrow, we'll be talking with veterans, talking about the investments they make in the community and in their families in serving our country. Join us at 1:00 tomorrow. We'll see you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.